They told me not to cry at the funeral. She was old, Aunt Merrill said, dabbing her powdered nose. She lived a full life. But grief didn't feel like the right word for what clung to my chest that day. Grandma Ruth was the only person who ever saw me, really saw me. In a house full of ambitious, polished, dismissive people, she was the one who noticed when I stopped eating, or when I came home quieter than usual. She raised me when Mom got too busy being married to career husbands and obsessed with Lila's pageants. And now, she was gone. And her house, her things, her words, all of it, belonged to someone else. At least, that's what they told me. The lawyer was waiting in the back of the funeral home, a man in a tired suit with a file under his arm and a permanent grimace like he hadn't slept since 2009. Per Ruth Whittaker's last signed testament, he said to the semicircle of family in the reception hall, the estate, including the house, the personal assets, and financial accounts, are to be distributed as follows. I stood quietly near the wall, heart drumming. Grandma had always said, "Don't worry, you'll be taken care of." I believed her, but when he read out the names, Aunt Merrill, Uncle David, Cousin Lila, and not mine, my fingers went numb. I cleared my throat. What about me? The lawyer didn't even look up. Your name wasn't listed in the final version of the will. There it was. Just like that. My entire life with her, erased with a shrug. Lila gave me a side glance and smirked behind her. Wine glass. Oh, honey, she whispered. She probably just forgot. You were always more of a charity case. Something inside me cracked. That night, I walked through Grandma's house in silence. They were already planning to sell it. That's what Aunt Merrill said, chattering into her phone on the porch like it hadn't been her mother's kitchen just 2 days ago. But I still had a key, and I still had questions. I stood in the living room, remembering the quiet rhythm of Grandma's slippers across the floor, the smell of lavender tea and old books. I drifted toward the bookshelf, fingers trailing across cracked spines, until I reached the one she used to read every Sunday morning, the Bible. It wasn't religious devotion that made her cling to it. It was memory. Pages marked with scribbles, pressed petals, old photos, and sometimes little letters she never sent. I opened it, and there, tucked between Psalms and Proverbs, was a thick yellowed envelope with my name written in Grandma's cursive. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a letter, folded neatly, a key to a small lockbox, a photocopy of a different will, one dated just 3 months before her stroke. And in this one, everything was different. To my dearest Eliza, the letter began. If you're reading this, then they've already tried to erase you. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at Grandma's kitchen table with her letter, rereading it under a single overhead bulb like it was sacred scripture. The will she left behind, the one hidden, listed me as the primary heir. Not Lila, not Aunt Merrill, not anyone else, just me. But it had never been filed. In her letter, she explained why. She no longer trusted her lawyer, said she suspected Merrill had gotten to him or convinced her to sign something she didn't understand. She was scared. She had memory lapses. She was being manipulated, and yet she still found the strength to hide this copy, to leave the key, to write to me. By morning, I had one goal: find the lockbox. I didn't know where it was yet, but Grandma always said, "I never keep anything important where people expect it. So while they planned to gut the house and sell it off, I planned something else. I was going to find what they thought they'd buried with her, and when I did, I was going to burn every lie they ever told. The morning after the funeral, the house was already echoing with footsteps that didn't belong. Cousin. Lila strutted in with a clipboard and a real estate agent in tow. I think if we knock down that wall, we could open it up for better staging, she said, gesturing toward Grandma's kitchen, as if she hadn't once cried at that table when her boyfriend dumped her junior year. I watched from the upstairs. Hallway, silent, invisible, just like they liked me. I had exactly 2 hours before they started boxing up what didn't belong to them. That meant I had to move fast. The key in the envelope was old and brass, the kind that belonged to a jewelry box or a fireproof safe, not some dusty kitchen drawer. Grandma was deliberate. She never did things by accident. So when she said, "I never keep anything important where people expect it," I took her seriously. I started in the bedroom. Her old dresser was untouched, the same place I used to watch her put on earrings and hum Patsy Cline. Top drawers were mostly scarves and half-empty perfume bottles. The third drawer down, however, had a false bottom, something I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't accidentally knocked one of the wooden dividers loose. I pried it up. Nothing, but there was a slip of paper taped to the underside of the wood. Not, "Here, love bug, try the place where stories sleep." I smiled. Grandma always had a flair for drama. Where stories sleep. The bookshelf, downstairs. I moved quickly, dodging Lila's pointed looks and Aunt Meryl's nasal voice talking about market value. I pretended to be crying again. It was the only thing that ever made them leave me alone. I reached the bookshelf in the den. Row after row of hardcovers, dusty novels, some still marked with her little flower-shaped post-its. Third shelf, left, side, the old fairy tale collection. There it was, the complete works of Hans Christian Andersen. I pulled the book out and felt it. Heavy, like something was tucked inside. It was hollowed out. Inside was a small metal lockbox, dull gray with the same worn edge as the brass key I held. Click. The key turned. Inside were more than just documents. There were letters, written in Grandma's hand, addressed to me, her lawyer, and her doctor. There were prescription notes, showing how her medication was altered in the final months. Even a small voice recorder with a tiny post-it. For Eliza, if anything happens. My heart thudded. I took it all. Tucked it in my bag just as Lila waltzed into the room. "You're still here?" she asked, pretending concern. "I thought you'd, gone home already." "I wanted one last moment," I said flatly. She leaned against the doorframe, checking her reflection in her phone. "You should probably get over all this. Grandma made her choice." I gave her a quiet smile. "Yeah, she did." I didn't. "Go home." I went straight to the public library. I scanned the will, every letter, every photo of bruises on Grandma's arm she'd clearly taken herself. Her shaking handwriting. I played the voice recording. Her voice cracked through the static. "Eliza, baby, if they're reading you that other will, it means they got to me. I was scared. I kept forgetting things. They said they'd put me in a home if I didn't sign, but I never wanted them to have it. This house. It's yours. All of it. Don't let them take it. Find my file. Give it to Mr. Lorenz. He's the real lawyer, not the one Meryl brought in. I'm so sorry." I sat in the library with tears running down my cheeks. She hadn't forgotten me. They'd stolen her voice, and now she was giving it back from the grave. That night, I made copies of everything. Digital backups, multiple USBs, a cloud folder under a new anonymous email, because this wasn't just about proving the truth anymore. It was about making sure they never got to bury it again. I had a new name now, Executor, and I was just getting started. By the time I knocked on the weathered office door of Mr. Lorenz, my hands had stopped shaking, but only just. The hallway smelled like old paper and floor polish, and the placard on his office read, Arthur Lorenz, Estate Law and Elder Protection, he. Wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to change a life. Thin, mid-60s, sleeves rolled up, his tie loose like he'd given up trying to impress people decades ago. But when I said my name and showed him Grandma's note, he froze. He pulled off his glasses. You're Eliza? Yes. He leaned back in his chair slowly, eyes scanning me. She said you might come one day. The box on his shelf held everything. I handled your grandmother's affairs for 20 years, he said. She updated her will with me, just before her health declined. But why wasn't that the will they used? I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. He sighed. 2 months after we filed it, your Aunt Merrill showed up with Ruth at another office. She claimed Ruth wanted changes, but Ruth looked confused, weak. I tried to reach her afterward, but she stopped answering. Someone blocked my number. Stomach turned. So they manipulated her while she was declining? They isolated her. He nodded. Classic case of elder coercion. I suspected as much. But unless you have proof... I slid the voice recorder across the table. He pressed play, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fire in his eyes. The next week passed like a blur of quiet strategy, while Aunt Merrill and Cousin Lila posted coming. Soon photos of the house like it was already theirs. I met with Arthur daily. We reviewed everything. The original will, the tampered version, the dates, the medical logs, the pharmacy reports that showed how Grandma's dosage changed after. Merrill took over her care, but the turning point came with something even colder. Bank statements. There. Arthur pointed. That withdrawal, $38,000. Same week Ruth's checks to her home nurse started bouncing. Guess where it went? I didn't have to guess. I recognized Lila's name on the PayPal tag, wedding deposit. Tuscany Villa, my mouth, went dry. They'd used Grandma's money, while she was sick. While I was bringing her soup and taking her to memory therapy, they were spending her savings to rent Italian castles. We filed the petition quietly. Arthur was deliberate, controlled, meticulous. He said people like Merrill expected shouting and confrontation, but they never expected a court summons. So that's what we gave them. The papers arrived on a Thursday. By Friday, my phone was lighting up with calls. First Merrill, then Lila, then even Uncle David, the one who hadn't even shown up to Grandma's funeral, but apparently found his voice when threatened with probate fraud. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked through the house one last time. I still had my key, and legally, now I had standing. The realtor's sign was still planted on the front lawn. I pulled it up and tossed it into the garage. Then I went to Grandma's garden. Even in winter, the rosemary was growing, stubborn, fragrant, wild, just like her. I sat down on the bench she loved, and I promised her out loud, I'm going to take it all back, Grandma. Every piece they stole. I didn't see the moment Merrill opened the envelope, but I imagined it, vividly. Her manicured fingers trembling just slightly. her eyes scanning the words over and over, hoping she misread, and then her voice, sharp and shrill, slicing through their Friday night dinner like one of her overpriced steak knives. Lila must have choked on her wine. By Saturday morning, I was a selfish, conniving little girl who doesn't understand what family means. Meryl's exact words, sent in a text blast. No greeting, no punctuation, just fury. I stared at my phone, then turned it off. I'd spent my entire life begging to be acknowledged. Now that I was a threat, now they saw me. Arthur kept things moving fast. The moment we had confirmation from the court that the hearing would be expedited due to elder coercion suspicion, he made another quiet move. He subpoenaed the care facility's records. I watched him scan through the nurse logs, the daily notes, the medication changes. He frowned. "Look at this," he said. She had consistent clarity up until mid-February. Then suddenly she was marked nonverbal, confused, and delusional. The same week Meryl changed her prescription provider. My jaw clenched. They made her decline faster, didn't they? He didn't answer. He just slid. The pages into a fresh folder labeled Exhibit B. Lila showed up at my apartment on Monday. No warning. No knock. Just loud, insistent banging, and her voice echoing through the hallway. "You're making a huge mistake, Eliza. You don't even know what you're doing." I opened the door, but I didn't step aside. She stood there in some faux fur coat, holding an overpriced handbag like it was her shield. Her eyes were puffed, her mascara imperfect, not the usual Instagram-ready version of her. "I don't want to fight with you," she said. "This is just, it's not fair." "Fair?" I said calmly. "Grandma left everything to me, and you used her bank account to pay for a Tuscany wedding while she was forgetting her own name." Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried again. "She would have wanted us all to have something, she did, and you took it anyway." I watched the color drain from her face. "You don't want to air this out in court, Lila. Trust me." And I closed the door in her face. By Friday, Arthur had a full case file ready for probate court. Witness testimony lined up. Grandma's primary nurse agreed to speak. A notarized statement from her old accountant was included, confirming Meryl's attempts to transfer emergency funds in the final weeks. And finally, the crown jewel, the voice recording of Grandma herself, naming me as her heir and pleading that I fight for what she meant to give. Arthur's words rang in my ears. They buried her. They didn't expect her to speak from the grave. A week before the hearing, a new letter arrived, not from court, not from Meryl. It was from the lawyer they had used, the one who read the final will. The letter was short, nervous, almost apologetic. "Ms. Whitaker, I've been contacted by Mr. Lorenz and have reviewed your evidence. I was unaware of your grandmother's original intentions. I deeply regret my role in this matter and wish to issue a correction to the court file. I will no longer be representing Ms. Meryl Ashby or Ms. Lila Calloway. Respectfully, Charles Hensley, Esquire." I read it twice. Then I laughed. The first real laugh since the funeral. They were cracking. The lies were unraveling, and for the first time in my life, I was no longer the invisible girl in the room. I was the one dragging the truth into the light. The probate hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. Was raining. The kind of cold, sharp rain that made everything feel heavier. I wore Grandma's brooch pinned to my coat, the one with the tiny forget-me-nots she used to say were delicate, but never weak. A quiet promise to myself. I'd see this through. I'd make them remember her. The courthouse lobby buzzed, with muted voices and wet umbrellas. But all that noise faded when I saw them. Meryl, Lila, and Uncle David, surprisingly, wearing a suit at least 2 decades out of style and an expression like he'd rather be anywhere else. They looked smaller, in person, or maybe I was just finally standing taller. Arthur nodded at me as we took our seats in the courtroom, calm, composed. But under the table, he slid over the final file, a binder full of evidence, audio, letters, witnesses, medical reports, the handwritten will. Across from us, Meryl whispered furiously to her new attorney, a man who looked like he'd been pulled from a country club brunch last minute. Lila stared straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes. The judge entered. Everyone stood, and then it began. They tried to argue diminished capacity. They said Grandma had changed her mind. They said she was confused in her final months. They said I had misunderstood her wishes. Arthur let them talk. He didn't interrupt once. Then he stood and began his response the same way Grandma would have. Quiet, simple, and devastating. Your Honor, the question today is not just who inherits, but how the decedent's wishes were so blatantly manipulated, and why the original lawful notarized will was hidden from the court entirely. He laid out our case like a surgeon with a scalpel, each exhibit, each date, each contradiction, and then he played it. Grandma's voice, frail but clear. If they're reading you that other will, they got to me. Eliza, don't let them have it. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the judge leaned forward. Afterward, the nurse took the stand. I cared for Ruth Whitaker for over 2 years, she said, firm and unswayed. She was coherent up until her medications were changed. I wasn't informed of the dosage switch. When I questioned it, I was told by Ms. Merrill that the family would handle things. She paused, then added, That's when Ms. Whitaker stopped responding and started crying at night. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tear slip under my jaw. I caught Lila staring at me, not with malice, but unease, because she knew what was coming next. At the end of the day, the judge requested a continuance. He needed time to review everything, but his expression made one thing clear. This was not going to end well for them. Outside the courthouse, Meryl stormed past me. She stopped just long enough to say, This is all for money. Don't pretend it's about anything else. I looked her dead in the eyes. No, I said softly. This is about what she wanted, and what you were willing to destroy to take it. Her lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smirk, but there was fear behind her eyes. The kind of fear people get when their lies finally run out of places to hide. The judge's continuance bought us 1 more week, 7 days to wait for the official ruling, 7 days of silence from their side. No more texts, no surprise visits, no desperate bargaining from Meryl, but that didn't mean I sat still. Arthur called on Wednesday. There's one more thing, he said. Your grandmother had a safe deposit box under her name. I found the paperwork in her old file. It wasn't mentioned in either will. I blinked. She never told me about a box. She didn't tell anyone. The key, by chance. Was it brass? Triangle cut? I pulled it from my desk drawer. Exactly that. I think we're about to find out what she really didn't want them to see. Friday morning, we met at the bank. The manager escorted us to the private vault section. her polite smile faltering only slightly when the lock clicked open. The box was heavier than I expected. Inside, a velvet pouch with Grandma's original wedding ring, a sealed envelope marked, "To be opened only if they lie." Copies of every letter she ever sent to the new lawyer, the one Meryl forced on her, and, most importantly, a notarized affidavit with her signature, and a witness confirming she was coerced into revising her will. My breath caught. She had left a paper trail. Not just proof. Legal confession from her own hand, made before they drugged her mind and trapped her in that house. I turned to Arthur. He was staring at the envelope with quiet awe. "She knew," he whispered. "She saw it coming. And she didn't just hope someone would fight for her. She planned for it." I nodded slowly. She trusted me to finish it. He took the affidavit and the sealed envelope and added them to our file. "Now we don't just have evidence. We have insurance. They try anything, and this goes straight to the DA." My chest tightened, but not with fear, with something close to power or peace. That night, I sat at Grandma's old kitchen table, the one they'd all wanted to rip out to open up the floor plan. I made tea in her cracked lavender kettle and laid everything in front of me. Her handwriting, her ring, the little letter that had started all of this. There was no silence in that house. Not really. There was memory. Echoes in every tile and curtain fold. "Don't let them take it, love bug. It's yours." When I stood to leave, I noticed something taped under the kitchen drawer. I almost missed it. A small envelope, brittle with age, held in place with yellowed tape. Inside was a photo of the two of us in her garden. I was 5. She had her arm around me and dirt on her hands. On the back she'd written, "To the only one who ever stayed long enough to plant something with me. Take root, Eliza. Grow wild." My hands shook. But not from sadness. From knowing. Because I wasn't just reclaiming what they stole. I was becoming everything they tried to erase. The courthouse hallway was colder this time. Not from weather, but from the way Meryl, Lila, and David wouldn't look at me, like avoiding my gaze would make the truth disappear. It was Judgment Day. The final hearing. Arthur was calm as ever, his hands folded on top of the leather binder, filled to bursting now. The affidavit, the bank withdrawal history, the nurse's statement, Grandma's voice. The voice of a woman who knew her own blood would betray her, and who trusted me to carry the weight of it all. The judge entered, and the courtroom rose. But this time, when I sat down, I felt different. Not nervous, prepared. Meryl tried to stall. Her new lawyer, a younger man, all talk and tailored suits, asked the judge for time to properly authenticate the audio and affidavit. Arthur stood without hesitation. "Your honor," he said, firm but controlled. The document was filed under penalty of perjury, witnessed, notarized, and stored in a safe deposit box registered in the decedent's name, using a key passed to her heir through a handwritten letter. The judge didn't blink. Motion denied. Then he turned to me. "Eliza Whitaker," he said. "You may speak." I took the stand, and I told the truth, not just about the will, but about all of it. How they shut me out of the funeral planning, how Meryl handled Grandma's medication behind doctors' backs, how they sold her belongings while she was still breathing in the next room, how Lila used thousands of dollars of Grandma's money to fund her destination wedding while claiming, It was for end-of-life care. How I was made to feel invisible until I became inconvenient, and how Grandma knew it. How she left a trail, even through the fog of failing memory, for me to follow. When I stepped down, I looked over. Lila had tears on her cheeks, but they weren't from guilt. They were from losing. Meryl? Her jaw clenched so tightly her face trembled. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something with concern written all over his face. The judge tapped his pen once. Then he ruled. I find sufficient evidence to conclude that the revised will presented to the court was executed under undue influence and lacks the clarity and intention expressed in the original document filed with Mr. Arthur Lorenz. This court reinstates the original last will and testament of Ruth Whitaker. Full inheritance and property rights are to be transferred to the named beneficiary Eliza Whitaker. The gavel struck like thunder. No shouting. No dramatic exits. Just silence. Thick, bitter silence from their side of the room, and a quiet breath from mine. Arthur leaned in and whispered, "She'd be proud of you, you know." I didn't answer right away. I just looked up through the skylight above the bench. Sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling into the courtroom like it had been waiting. So had I. Outside, the air smelled like wet grass and magnolia. Lila passed, me on the steps. She paused, just for a moment. "You ruined us," she said, her voice shaky. "You'll never be part of this family again." I turned to her, calm. "You took everything from a woman who loved you like her own. I'm not the one who ruined anything." She blinked hard, jaw twitching, but she didn't respond. She couldn't, because the truth didn't care who it embarrassed anymore. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. I went home. Grandma's home. My home. The key turned easily. The front door creaked the same way. It always had. The house smelled of rosemary, lemon oil, and rain-damp earth from the garden. I stepped inside, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a visitor. I felt like I'd come back to where I'd always belonged. The sun was setting the day the deed arrived in the mail. It came in a thick manila envelope stamped with the court's seal. Official, sterile, final. I opened it alone in the kitchen, where her tea kettle still sat, and unfolded the papers with slow, deliberate care. My name was at the top, Eliza Ruth Whitaker, owner of 227 Magnolia Grove Lane. My breath caught in my chest. It was real now. No more paperwork, no more lawyers, no more courtrooms or battles or lies whispered over caskets. The house was mine, but I knew. I hadn't just inherited property. I'd inherited a legacy of memory, silence, resilience, and finally, justice. In the weeks that followed, I didn't rush to repaint the walls or rip out the cabinets like they wanted. I kept the curtains she sewed herself. I polished the old floorboards that creaked when she danced through the kitchen. I replanted her rosemary by the back gate and added tulips beside it, just like we talked about but never had time for. And when I reopened the neighborhood library box Grandma ran for years, neighbors I barely knew came by with cookies and stories. She helped me get through my divorce. She gave my daughter free piano lessons when we couldn't afford them. She always knew when to call. She'd left so much behind, and now I was finally strong enough to carry it forward. Meryl never contacted me again. Lila tried to stir pity online, but people weren't sympathetic. Not after the court records showed how much they'd taken. The Tuscany wedding got quietly canceled. Their last name, once printed on dinner place cards and charity invitations, was now whispered with something like shame. They'd buried the truth. But truth has a pulse. It beats even underground. One morning, I found another letter, tucked deep in the pages of her Bible. I must have missed it the first time. It was addressed only for when it's over. Eliza, if you're reading this, then you did it. I hope the house feels warm again. I hope you remember that the kitchen smells like lemon on Saturdays, and that your favorite cup is still in the second cabinet to the left. But mostly, I hope you know this. You were never a guest in my home. You were my reason for building one. Love always. Grandma, I cried for a long time. Then I made tea, and I sat in her chair by the window with the letter in my hand, the sun on my face, and the world exactly where it should be.